and welcome to the Tom Baker Show. We continue our spring training shows here as we prepare to soon take this show live on Thursday nights from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern. I got a question for you. How did you like Daytona? NASCAR's biggest weekend is come and gone. I'm going to start this show by tossing a compliment to everyone involved for doing the best they could to get all the racing in despite a weekend of crappy weather. I totally supported the ARCA race moving to Friday night, and it's a good thing they did. There wouldn't have been enough hours in the day to run it on Monday. But what did you think of the weekend? Did you like the Daytona 500? Is this the type of racing that you want to continue to see in the Super Bowl of stock car racing? If you didn't like it, how do we make it better? Can we make it better? Let's start by looking at the controversial final lap. Corey LaJoie and Austin Cindric spin down into the grass. NASCAR waits to see if a yellow is needed. If they'd stayed in the grass and off the wall, more than likely the race would have just stayed green. Austin came back up toward the track, so NASCAR deemed that the yellow needed to be thrown. Byron was shown ahead by the photo NASCAR used. Now, there's a human element that comes into all of this at this point. There's a natural delay between the decision to hit the button and the execution of the button, and everybody seeing the caution light and who's where, when that all happens, and how they determine who's leading. NASCAR's waiting, trying not to throw a caution, and then they realize they have to. They make the decision, hit the button, the light comes on, and the field is frozen. That's all going to take a few seconds. By the time I say something, you hear it, process it, and understand it. There's an eyelash of time that passes. Now, we can have a whole other show discussing whether or not they should have thrown the yellow or how consistent or inconsistent they are in making those decisions. But I do think they got this one right. I think the major issue that a lot of us had was exactly when does the field get frozen and who was leading at the time and how does NASCAR determine that? And it seems like maybe either it has fluctuated over the years from it's the time the light comes on to it's the time that they hit the button, or they're just explaining it differently every time. Now, I've got an idea for how they can very easily put an end to these controversial endings. And I'll share it with you right after this from Track Tune.
Now in the lead breakaway is Derek Thorne catching up with Bubba Pollard and Matthew Craig. Meanwhile, the race for fourth once again heating up between Preston Peltier, who has it, and Hunter Robbins, who's trying to take it away.
Welcome back. Okay, so let's talk more about NASCAR and the end of the Daytona 500 and how we can maybe put an end to all this mess that happens with race back, not race back, next flag ends the race, all of that. NASCAR's rule as it's currently written says that the next flag that wins the race after the leader takes the white. That's what causes these arbitrary issues. Because it's once you have that rule, now it comes back to, well, when exactly did we throw the caution? And the other part that causes the problem is that NASCAR tries to freeze the field at the closest point. There's an easy fix for this. Now, I hate yellow flag endings. Anybody who's known me longer than 15 minutes knows that every time we end a race under the caution, I just get incensed because it's an improper ending. Fans don't show up and pay thousands of dollars to travel to the Super Bowl of stock car racing, or any race event for that matter, to see the race end in single file order, right? How many of you would agree with me about that? However, I do recognize that in the current situation on these super speedways, we literally could spend half a day trying to end a race because cars race in packs, they push and shove each other all over the racetrack, and this is what causes almost every major wreck we have, right? So I can't do anything about that yet. But let's just focus on how we can put an end to who was leading, where did the light come on, and all this stuff. Well, it's pretty simple, really. What if the leader takes the white, and then we have the crash, the caution, but instead of trying to freeze the field and figure out who was where by a random photo, why don't we just do what short tracks do? Why don't we just go back to the last fully completed lap when everybody crossed the line and determine the order from that? Now, if you're going to end the race, then the race ends. Whoever led lap 198 at that point, that's the winner. You take the caution cars and put them to where they would go in the order. If they've completed 198 and somebody else is 197, then that's where they slot in at the end of the lead lap cars if they're on the lead lap. Put them where they belong, but go back to the last fully completed lap. Then everyone knows who wins no matter what. That's an easy fix. I don't think it's the right one. I'd rather see a race end under green, but if you're going to have that rule about the next flag ending the race, then at least create a way to determine the order that ensures that there's no controversy. We're just going back to the last fully completed lap, and that's the order we're going to use to determine who wins and where everybody finished. It would be much easier and would remove having to determine when a button was hit or who was ahead by a photo. But that's not even my biggest problem here with this weekend. My biggest problem is I don't know if the type of racing we're seeing now on super speedways is what we ought to be seeing. Is this really the way that we want the world to tune in every year in February? I mean, twice a year, really. But do we want to see 40 cars in a pack pushing and shoving, not being able to just pull out and pass by themselves? Do we like the fact that the Daytona 500, our biggest race, has basically turned into a game of chance? It's 90% luck and 10% skill, and I don't think that's an insult to the drivers. I think many of the drivers, or most, would probably agree with me. If you cannot on your own use your own skill to be able to pull out and pass the car in front of you because you're better than he is, or your car is better than he is or she is, what's wrong with the picture? I mean, here's the problem, though. I don't know how to fix it. Back when Bill France built these tracks, the tracks were far faster than the cars, right? Now it's the opposite. Now, if we took big, bold 800-900 horsepower motors and put them in and took them to Daytona and didn't restrict them in any way, shape, or form, how fast would they be running? 230? 240? Would that, the racing might be better. Is it safe? I mean, do we want to go there? I'm sure there's some purists that are watching this that probably would be real excited about trying that. I don't know how many of the drivers would vote for it. What do we do here? Where's the problem? Do we just unleash the horsepower, let them run that fast? Or do we alter the tracks in some way to slow down the cars? Well, I don't know the answer. But I hope we're discussing it, because I'm not sure I want to continue to see this kind of racing. Oh, it's exciting as a fan to just sit on the edge of your seat for 3.5 hours with 40 cars all running together, but you just know. I mean, shoot, how long did it take any of the divisions to start crashing over the weekend? I think almost every division had a wreck before lap 20 that was multi-car in nature. The truck race was awful. It was embarrassing. The ARCA race wasn't any better. And every interview you hear, all we talk about is pushing, bump drafting. Is this what we want? I mean, I love the truck series, but I've said from the beginning, that was created as a short track series. I don't know how you make the trucks aerodynamic enough to run those kind of speeds and put drivers who have almost no super speedway experience on a super speedway track together with drivers who've been racing for 20 or 30 years on those speedways and create anything other than what we see every year. I think, honestly, my opinion, and I'd love to know yours, I'd love to see the trucks go back to short tracks again, have their own brand identity, make the business model feasible. There were short track teams, short track drivers at the end of that period for the trucks, what I'll call chapter 1, when the trucks were a short track series. Toward the end of that, there were short track teams looking into moving into the trucks and racing the trucks. And I thought NASCAR had a great thing, but then they made it basically just another traveling national series and an opening act. I mean, do we keep this up? If we're going to keep racing the trucks there, I've got a great idea. Let's go get Constant Contact to be the sponsor going forward. Because I really, truly don't know how we have any type of racing other than what we have now. I don't know how you fix that. I mean, the trucks aren't built to be aerodynamic. That's just not how that works. Now, we expect the ARCA race to have yellow fever because, again, there's a huge gap in super speedway experience. But I thought it interesting that Frank Kimmel II said on his Facebook over the weekend that back in about 2014, despite the fact that he had already run Salem twice, he didn't get approval to compete at Daytona. What's changed? What's different? I can remember when Andy Hillenberg used to have a school that all drivers had to go through in order to be eligible and approved to compete in the ARCA series. Is it time for a reset? Is it time to go back and look at the ways in which we used to approve racers and what the requirements were and what they are now and make some changes? Is it time to admit that maybe we've gotten a little bit too free, too lax on what we require in order to advance? I mean, we've got 9-year-olds racing in late models now. Story over the weekend from Tennessee, a 9-year-old young man apparently is doing just fine, but he's 9. Do we think that's okay? I mean, it was 16, then it was 14, then we got a bunch of 12-year-olds. Now we're approving a 9-year-old. How low do you go? Should we be considering factors other than whether this young man can control the car? And I mean, what about the adults racing out there with this kid? What goes through their minds? And we all know that dirt late model racing, much like any form of late model racing, is a full contact sport at times. And we all know that sometimes drivers lose their minds and their tempers. Is this what we want? Is this where we wanted or want our sport to go? I don't know the answers, but I surely do have a lot of questions after last weekend. 3 out of the 4 races at Daytona. I'm excluding the Xfinity Series here because I actually thought that was, for the most part, a pretty decent race. It seemed, the Cup race, I guess, mostly was too, but the Xfinity race seemed like it was just a little bit tamer than the other 3. 3 out of the 4 were run as if the drivers had a push to crash button and couldn't wait to use it. But is it a car issue? Do we get rid of spoilers? Do we raise the ride heights and find some kind of a better balance between aero and mechanical grip? Is that even possible? Or have the engineers that most of these teams have on staff now figured out enough of the secrets to make that small step backwards unfeasible and ineffective? Is it a track issue? As a fan, this may make me controversial, but it wouldn't be the first time. I would honestly be okay with changes to either Daytona or Talladega or both if it would bring back racing where the drivers can pull out, pass each other, and stop crawling up each other's back ends the entire race. I want safe racing, but I also want to eliminate 40-car packs. Is it a horsepower issue? How do you give horsepower back to create more passing without giving it back to everyone equally and just ending up with the same result we have now at faster speeds? How do we avoid that? I'm going to read some of the posts, some of the first posts in my Facebook stream, on my Facebook feed after the race was over. One user says, just deleted the Xfinity race before it even started. I'm so done with Daytona. Another one, the ending of a race on whenever somebody chooses to press the yellow button is comical. It literally isn't that simple, but I understand. Another one, worst Daytona 500 finish ever. Another one, that sucked. Worst end to a race. Well, that finish was bogus. Happy for Byron, but I wish they gave him a chance to run the last lap. Sat around for hours just for that. Next one. That finish was meh. That's probably a compliment compared to the others, right? Another one says, happy to say I didn't spend all afternoon watching that race. How about you? And the final one, you'll never see a dirt track race finish under the caution. Just remember that. Now look, I don't want to just bash NASCAR. I've been in race control for events. I understand how difficult the job is, and I understand that you're making decisions in milliseconds, but I do think that sometimes NASCAR has a tendency to overanalyze, and they layer rule on top of rule on top of rule on top of rule to the point where you can't actually 100% determine without controversy. Everything's done by, I think they've got too many loops, for example. Why do you need all those loops in the track? Why can't we just go back to the loop at the finish line and maybe the ones in the pits to determine pit road speed? But these are things, if you just can change a little bit of the way that you do this and take the controversy out of it, then at least it's consistent. I don't pretend to have a lot of great ideas on how to get us back to eliminating the game of chance that the 500s become. Racing at Daytona, period, any of those races, it's more luck than it is skill, and that's a shame. But I'm hoping that those in charge on both sides, The teams and NASCAR are as frustrated as I am and willing to ask the hard questions and put anything on the table to figure things out for the future. Because I feel like the future of the direction of the entire sport is determined by this. Everything flows from the top down. If go-kart racers, quarter midget racers, legend car racers, if they see this kind of pushing, shoving, and contact at Daytona and in NASCAR races and it's allowed, they do it. They think this is what racing is. I don't think that's the way it should be. I just hope it's not too late for us to fix what ailed us all weekend at Daytona. Join us next week for another edition of the Tom Baker Show. Appreciate you watching. Love to hear your comments. We do love the feedback from the fans. I want to know what you're thinking, because I want to know if I'm the only one that's just sort of wringing my hands over this. I don't want to just bash NASCAR. I want to be part of the solution. I want to see ideas come out to help us get away from this. I think the drivers and teams would too. We've got some much bigger problems brewing in NASCAR that we can talk about on future shows, but this one was certainly the one that was most prevalent all weekend long, and it's our biggest race. Until next time, more great content, steeringwheelnation.com. I'm Tom Baker. Thanks for watching.